Hi, welcome to Atlassian Tech TV. My name's Chris Mountford, and I take you inside Atlassian to show you how we make software. In this episode, I sit down with Nick Pellow, a development manager with many years of engineering experience across Atlassian's developer tools. Nick Pellow from the Stash team. You're the development manager in the Stash team, right?
Correct.
Cool. And how long have you been in that role?
It's quite a new role for me, Chris. I've been only there for about 5 or 6 months.
Yeah.
So prior to that, I was working on a similar team, the Fisheye Crucible team, and now I've taken over the reins of Stash. And yeah, it's very exciting. It's a bigger challenge for me. It's a much bigger team. They're moving a lot faster.
All right.
It's quite exciting.
So yeah, tell us a bit about the team. How many people are on it, and what kind of?
So there's about 34 people dedicated full-time to Stash now. So that's all sorts of roles.
Yeah.
So we're split up into about 4 teams now.
Right.
With 4 team leads. And
so not just developers?
Not just developers, no, that's right. So we have at least 2 designers, we have 2 QA, we have 2 product managers as well. We have myself, we have architect, and we have a new role, a principal developer, who's been carved off onto his own mini team, which is called the engine room team.
Right. Yeah, we had one of them on Jira for quite a while.
Yep.
So engine room, I guess it's what it sounds like. It's not necessarily up in the front end, is it?
Exactly. Not necessarily. So he's tasked with, I guess, maintaining a lot of the engineering health of the project and the product, and a lot of the things that users and customers don't necessarily see. He may be involved in ensuring that the developer experience is awesome.
Right.
Right now, he's working on evolving our public API.
Right.
And trying to do that in the correct way.
Is that a binary API or a REST API? Or?
That's a Java binary API, right. And he will do REST API changes if and as needed.
Okay, cool.
Like that, yeah.
Well, before I get any more detail about that, let's talk about your, I guess, your past, your history with software. You've been a hands-on developer and you've got those skills, and now you're a development manager. That's quite a common story, I think, and I think probably a lot of developers like to report to someone who has those same skills. It probably helps. But how did you begin with? How did you begin with programming? When did you first discover the computer?
That's an awesome question. When did I first discover the computer? I'll be honest. I grew up pretty much without any computers in the house. I first realised that though when Dad brought a VHS machine home from school for the weekend, and I was kind of tasked with tuning it into the TV and getting it set up, and then setting the clock, and then
solving the flashing 12 problem.
Exactly, setting it up to record a show, like the timer, and I managed to get all of that working somehow. Right. And I think that, I don't know, the fact that I could do that, and then we had a video camera, so I was getting into a little bit of AV stuff at that time and was just messing around with that. And then later on...
So how old were you then?
I was, I don't know, 11, 12. Right. And then I did a fair bit of that throughout high school, but I never really, got into computing. And then I went to university and I did a very general science and arts degree, and then it was in that first kind of week where you're trying to decide what courses to sign up to, because you've got open slather. And I went around and talked to a bunch of departments. I was into maths, physics, things like that, and then for some reason I went and talked to the computer science department, thinking there's no way I'll ever want to sit in front of a computer all day as a job. Like, that's how I was thinking.
Yeah.
That just sounds boring. And then just spoke to some really interesting professors and stuff there who kind of described computers in a new light that I'd never really seen before.
Right, that's cool. So the story is really university got you into it.
Yes, absolutely.
My story is like the opposite. University turned me off it. I was into it already, and then when I got to university, they were telling me, first day it was computer science course, and they were saying, oh, anyone who's come here to learn programming, don't think this is what this is about. And everyone was looking at each other going, well, what is it about? And they said, it's the science of computation. And we're all thinking, right, well, can you tell us where the programming course is? Because that's what we're all paying here for,
Yeah.
So
No, it was the total opposite. I mean, I saw 90% of the course was full of people like yourself. And I was probably in the lower minority, just learning as much as I could and just going for it.
Right, yeah, no, I remember you kind of people.
Just going. And I got someone, like, I had lots of good friends there, and I remember them in the first week or 2 weeks, and I had no idea. I was probably given a Linux shell. And I was just going, what? And he knew everything about it. And he was describing to me what a file was. I remember having the concept of not understanding what a file in a directory was.
Right.
Bit embarrassing.
It's like the files are inside the computer.
All of that stuff. Yeah. Just, whoa. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So fast forward, and I guess I suspect you and I might have crossed paths before we kind of met through Atlassian and maybe the Sydney software development scene, as such as it is.
Yep.
But you were working at Cortex, right? And then that company became Senqua.
Yep.
And then that was it Atlassian's first acquisition?
It could have been, yeah. Maybe.
So you were like an acqui-hire, or were you a founder of that company?
No, I was an acqui-hire.
Right.
So I was.
Okay. So you came with.
I was contracting for them.
Right.
Yep.
And then you came on board to Atlassian, and that was when was that?
That was in late 2007.
Right. So yeah, some time ago.
Yep.
Probably when some of our grads were born. No, not quite. No,
maybe at least when they were at uni.
Yeah. Right.
Starting uni.
Okay.
At high school. Yep.
And so what was that like, coming into a bigger company?
I won't lie. How was it? It was kind of daunting. It was lots of fun. There was, I had distinctly remember, and I still do like explaining this way, and I think it's still there, it's kind of reminds me of the university days, being on campus at a university. So I was lucky enough to live there in one of the colleges, and then it was kind of that fun vibe with lots of smart, intelligent people that you're kind of surrounded with, and they're all doing pretty amazing things. And that's a memory I have of those, definitely, of how it was to join.
So obviously the company's grown and things have changed internally, hopefully mostly for the better, but how do you see specifically the software process, getting back to, say, your team on Stash? You mentioned how there are sub-teams, there's quite a lot of developers. How many were at Atlassian roughly when Senqua was acquired? It probably wouldn't have been too many times bigger than the whole Stash team that you're running now. So that's a lot of growth. And now you're overseeing a team. You want to sort of capture that productive energy.
Definitely.
So how do you do that as a dev manager?
It's a very good question, Chris. How do I do that as a dev manager? I mean, like I was saying before, it's a very mature team in a sense. They're a tightly bonded team, so they've been together for probably a good 3 years.
Okay.
There's been quite a bit of growth recently. So what are we trying to do on the Stash team is, I guess we're trying to give team leads freedom to kind of own their own decisions and then be accountable to those decisions.
Right.
And that's certainly something.
So that's something actually a lot of people ask me, and I'm sure you've had these questions, especially at conferences. How does Atlassian do this? And what's the Atlassian software process? And a lot of the time, well, there is one, but it's not really one process, is it? You're talking about freedom, and a lot of people also call it autonomy. The idea that people can define teams, team leads, teams themselves, can define their own process to quite a large degree. And in some ways, that's the process, that autonomy, because you get efficiencies from that.
Yep.
But you sacrifice a certain amount of consistency across the teams.
Definitely.
How do you find that balance? Because you're talking about freedom,
yep.
But you're also...
Stash is a classic example. I mean, we have 3, well-founded teams, and they all have very different process, I would say.
Right.
But they do have to ship together and integrate together at times and get stuff going. So yeah.
Expand that. That's one of the, I mean, that's one of the difficult things, isn't it? Shipping is a strong imperative. You know, we were talking about this before. You've got to ship. You've got to make sure your feature throughput is there and that the quality is there. And you have to work to deadlines. You have to actually coordinate with people, and merging software. Obviously, that's really the subject matter of a lot of what Stash is for. Stash, obviously, you know, merging and managing source code.
Yep.
So how does the Stash team do all of that?
Good question. So
I only ask questions.
Yeah, well, I've noticed. What we're, I mean, I see my job as trying to help people kick goals and succeed in their output, and that team is a success individually, and then if we have 3 very successful teams, then I'm sure that the Stash product as a whole will be very, very successful. And then it's a matter of how to measure that.
Yeah.
And one measure, I guess, is that we are shipping value to customers and ensuring that we're prioritising that where appropriate. But we've also got to keep check on things like technical debt and development speed and all of that, so that the engineers stay happy.
Yeah.
And
the long-term viability of the code base is
absolutely, good. Yeah. So, I mean, one thing we did very recently was we did what's called a $100 test for all the developers. So we had this spreadsheet, just a Google Docs sheet, and we listed a bunch of ideas as things which are totally off the product manager's roadmap, just things that we want to do engineering-wise as a team. It included things like, you know, let's investigate more of our flaky tests, let's fix performance, let's give everyone, you know, 5 monitors, or, you know, so where we could spend some of our own money and investment. Let's have more parties, or whatever. And then each developer was allowed to spend $100, up to $100 on any of those items. We had about 35 kind of items down the left column.
What does that mean, spend $100?
So under their name, they could just allocate them. So all they wanted to spend, or you could have buy 10 things at $10 or 100 things at $1, or whatever you wanted.
Right. So this is a way of apportioning, you know, up to 100 units of allocation.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly right. Of what we're going to do for the next 12 months as an engineering team. The sell I was like, what things are going to make you most happy?
Yeah.
As an engineer, if we're to keep focusing on these things.
So I'm going to guess that not everyone just put $100 on more parties.
No, that was awesome to see that.
That's the fear of some people.
Yeah. No, surprisingly, more parties does not make engineers more happy.
Right.
Unsurprisingly, so that's good. No, what were the top 3 things? The number 1 was focus more on performance as a feature, which is great. Get more time to pay down our technical debt.
Right.
And then the last one was, fix our flaky tests, or fix or kill our flaky tests.
Yeah, right. So I've got that. I want to drill into that.
Go into that. Yeah.
So before we talk about flaky tests, let's just make sure we're all on the same page. So you're talking about automated tests that are run, say, on check-in or at various other events, and there are presumably quite a large suite of these sorts of things. And you know, my understanding of flaky tests is tests that might pass once, but then if you run them again, maybe they don't pass, or vice versa. So without changing the code, the result of the test could change.
Totally.
And that's not supposed to happen, because tests are supposed to be totally deterministic.
Yes.
But not all tests are, right?
Unfortunately not. So, unfortunately not. I mean, specifically our problem is, and I think this is very common across Atlassian, when I've had quite a few people come and ping me after I blogged about this. Specifically, it's with web browser tests and Webdriver Selenium tests.
Yeah.
Where you can, it's very easy to write a test which will work sometimes.
Right, so these are tests that have a lot of stuff going on. You've got the browser, you've got the server-side software. The browser is being driven by code as opposed to by a person manually testing things, clicking this, waiting for that to pop up, then clicking this.
Totally, lots and lots of moving parts. And unlike a unit test, you're fully, you've spun up an actual server and it's connected to a database and it's got all its moving parts going. And
yeah, so obviously a unit test is much smaller, less code being executed. Maybe it's one class or one method of a class.
Correct.
Yeah.
So what some of the tools that have kind of been employed. So someone had written a JUnit rule, which will detect a test has failed, and before flagging that test as a failure, it will run it another 2 times.
Right.
The problem with this is actually quite nice. It's kept our master build green and we're all happy. However, the problem is we still have flaky tests and we do not know if it's a matter of the test being flaky or the actual functionality that is under test, which is indeterminate.
Right. That's interesting. So we call them flaky tests, but they could be flaky product.
Absolutely. Flaky test is a misnomer, actually. Totally.
Right.
It's
that's interesting.
Yeah. So it's something to be aware of.
We had some strange problems with Selenium on the Jira team. We have had the same sort of problem, just as you described it. And Selenium is obviously one of these tools that does browser driving for the purpose of testing. And depending on the browser sometimes, the clickability of certain elements is decided based on the within viewport location of the geometric center of that element.
Whoa.
And you might have things like the first time you go into a section of the product, there are these pop-ups saying, oh, hello, you haven't used this before. Would you like to do this? Would you like to do that? And they may push things down a little. And so depending on how many other things have happened on that instance from that session, you could have a test result that says, well, that thing's not in view. I mean, it may well totally be clickable because the top third of an element is there and it's a big section and you can click it, and anyone in there, if it was a human, they'd be able to click that.
Yep.
But they can't. But Selenium says, no, I can't click that because the geometric center happens to be under the fold, and that's that. Whereas that's what it does on IE and Chrome, but on Firefox it says, sure, I'll click whatever you like. If it's at the bottom of the page, if it's underneath a whole pile of elements, no problem. So those things,
we've hit that.
Even
that is
flaky frameworks, I guess you could say,
Yep.
depending on what your expectations and what's the declared
We've
behavior.
hit that same problem in our Jira integration tests as well, with the Jira what's new dialogue obscuring an element that we were trying to hit in some way. So that was definitely one of the things. So we're constantly trying to fix flaky tests, and we've got a big kind of a hit list, I guess, of the most flaky tests, and we're working through those when we have time. And for every single flaky test, we're doing a root cause analysis to work out the real cause of the flake, because you can only, once you've found why it's flaky, the fix is generally pretty simple. So it's really important that we're capturing that root cause analysis to kind of share back to the team. Because a lot of times it's not understanding maybe how Selenium works. For example, that geometric center is below the fold and you can't click it, so wow. There are also just best practices. So, for example, always using timeouts when you're checking for an element rather than just trying to check it and then you get a bunch of race conditions.
Totally. Yeah. So there's a lot of things in there. That root cause analysis, especially when you bring in processes like that. Is there any talk about whether it's all worth it? No, I don't mean automated testing as a whole. I think there wouldn't be hardly anyone at Atlassian who thinks that no automated testing is the right amount. But I've certainly been in discussions with engineers where they're saying, I think we just have too many of this kind of test, and the benefits we get are outweighed by the costs, the true total cost, including this root cause analysis of these flaky tests. I mean, what do you say to that? I mean, there's obviously two sides to this.
So I can see both sides, absolutely. And yeah, it is a balance that needs to be struck between, we need to be testing smarter, potentially, rather than testing more. So we do strive to have as much test coverage as we can at that unit test layer. And then up higher on the pyramid, We want a few func tests, and the Stash team already are doing this fantastically, where they don't test any edge cases, for example, in func tests. That's all just about happy path.
Okay, so these are those tests like the Selenium ones we were talking about, clicking through functionality. So it's probably testing integration of all of the components, the units that they're all working together. Mm-hmm. But you also mentioned another kind of test there that really scares people. I think they tend to be much harder as integration tests between multiple systems, meaning systems built by multiple teams, which are themselves tested, but which need to integrate, and where those teams need to collaborate, and where those tests need to obviously deploy or utilize both products. And then there's the whole question of, well, if there is a problem, who's going to fix it, and whose problem is it?
Yep.
How do you run that? Have you got any tips for us? Because you're overseeing it, you're not the one.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I haven't dug specifically into that yet too much. I mean, I'm still for what Stash is doing, but as far as I know, we run up a Jira and we run up a Stash, and we have them connected, and then we can just assert certain behaviour and certain functionality is available. So you do in each one. So
do you use the latest version of Jira, or do you use sort of fixed versions that you then bump up every,
I don't know.
Well, that's okay. No, you don't need to know. You've got people for that, right?
That's right. But yeah, on that, I mean, it's one of those things. Me personally, I am very averse to non-determinate tests, and I really and also complexity in tests.
Right.
If that makes sense. So if we're going to add a bunch of complexity, even if it's just the fact that our build is going to take an extra hour or an extra 10 minutes or 20 minutes every single time, I want us to really consider that as a knock-on effect, and the fact that when that Jira integration test fails, that it's going to take a period of work to go off and investigate, rather than is there more manual testing? You can sometimes do. How can we catch this stuff in dog fooding? Can we have better monitoring? We're using our tools all of the time. At the same time, I like to, the way I think about tests in general is they're kind of my insurance policy.
Right.
So I've implemented a feature. When Jira goes and changes their API in some breaking way, it's my feature that's going to break, and I'm going to be the one blamed for that. I don't want to be blamed for that because someone else has changed something. So I want to catch it and then sort of very quickly find out, or show someone that, look, something else has changed, and then let's move on. So
in that case, do you write the test for Jira that it does what you expect it to do, or do you write the test for Stash to see that the things that it relies on Jira to do are still there?
I would write it for Stash.
Yeah.
But that being said, I don't think I've ever written a Jira integration test with
okay.
Stash. It's more even internally, right? So that other thing need not be Jira. It may just be another subcomponent of Stash, for example. Right. So when that subcomponent of Stash, and that's what more likely happens, because it's not across a public API boundary, and we tend to change semantics on that more easily.
Yeah. So you talked about dog fooding. You mentioned it just before. Just making sure that we all know what that means. That's a kind of testing, I suppose, isn't it? What take us through what dog fooding means for the Stash team.
Okay, so dog fooding is a verb, a shortened verb from the phrase "eat your own dog food."
Right.
I think
sounds
most
tasty.
people are, exactly. Most people are probably familiar with that term, but we're very fortunate in that we are writing software for ourselves as our first customer.
Right.
So
you're a software team. You need software.
So very easily. I mean, if we were writing insurance brokerage software, then I don't think
done that.
You've done that.
Yeah. Suboptimal.
Did you eat your own dog food?
To a degree. We needed a bit of help from people who knew what insurance was, things like that.
Yep.
Underwriters.
Actuaries.
Yeah.